Jelani Killings.
What's going on, Jerry?
Good to have you, man.
Good to be here.
I guess we should start with how we know each other. We've known each other for a very long time. Went to high school together, played youth sports together, played high school sports together. And now we're here at this point in our life. You were mayor of Pittsburg, and now you are running for the supervisor of Contra Costa County, District 5. Now, I'm not one that's into politics much, which is why I really want to do this interview so we can talk candidly about what you do. And I think a good question to start is, why did you get into politics? You've always been a leader in high school. Why politics?
Man, it's a good question because growing up, was never thinking about running for office. That was never anything that crossed my mind growing up. But I think the seeds had always been planted. I remember, being involved in rec leagues and then eventually serving on the Pittsburg Youth Commission. And so, had one of our close friends, Tino, growing up. His mom worked for the rec department in the city. She kept us engaged in all the city stuff. And so she had us signed up for the Youth Commission. And that really opened my eyes to kind of just like government and advocating for young people at the time for what we want to see for youth in the city. Also, doing leadership at high school. I think really where it started to click was when I went off to college. And there we had started like a student movement, and it was called Vote to Live. And it was during the 2008 election. So, I'm at Clark Atlanta University at HBCU. Everybody's excited. We're talking about President Barack Obama. So it was just a lot of buzz. And, at the time, I think it was Diddy, he had like an initiative called Vote or Die.
I remember that.
Right. And so like the connotation of that was like, vote or die. That sounds kind of extreme. So we kind of flipped and we're like, vote to live, vote to live. And so just trying to stress the importance of being involved, understanding about how politics impacts us and thinking about our future. And so that really kind of, I think, hit the switch in terms of wanting to be engaged with politics and really more so the advocacy and the education. And so when I came back home from college, I started getting involved in like local nonprofit work, working with youth and after school programs. And where it really jumped off was in 2012 or 13, there was an opening for a school board position. So one of the school board members had resigned. They were moving to Southern California, and they had an open interview process for it. So I had been working with youth, and they were all like, hey, school board opening, you should go for it. And, I was just, young, full of passion, like, man, I got ideas for the youth, and been working in college career preparedness programs and just trying to help youth and seeing that there were issues that weren't happening in the district. And so from there, I went for the interview and made it to the top 3. And so from there, community members were like, you should have got it, stay involved. But this is really where it was big for me, where the light bulb really went off in terms of like getting engaged in politics for real. Because I was going because I knew there was a need for youth. I had a passion for youth. But what I understood at that moment through that interview process was I didn't understand organizations. I didn't understand kind of the policy making, the administration of it all. And so although I was being encouraged to keep going, I knew that I was missing something. So that's when I went back and got my master's in public policy and management. And then going through that master's program, understanding how policy is developed, understanding how to manage public organizations, like a light bulb just went off. And we started talking about like this dichotomy between administration and policy. And I knew right then and there, like, man, I was in the wrong field. Like, I didn't really have a knack for education curriculum. It was more about community development for me, about people, outcomes, jobs, building something for the future. And so that's really where it started to click for me as far as, okay, I want to be engaged at the city level. After I graduated in 2015, about a year later is when I made my first run for Pittsburgh City Council in 2016, and just been engaged. And I think overall, when you say, what kind of made you get engaged, it's just a need for strong leadership. You're seeing things in your community. You want to see things change. And then you're kind of seeing this trajectory, right? So for me, I look over the course of time. When you're young, you're really not thinking about it, right? It's like, who's thinking about politics? You're kind of just growing up and just living life. But after graduating, then coming back And now being at a place where it's like 20 years removed from high school, think about that, right? 20 years removed from high school. Like, I look back over 20 years and like, man, what has happened? Like, what has changed? Are things getting better? And when you start to see things that are really bothering you from that perspective, and you're looking at leadership, you're hearing things that are being said, and it's like, well, I hear you saying one thing, but the reality is it's not getting better. We're actually seeing more decline in certain areas. And it was like, you know what? Well, why don't you put yourself forward? Why don't you do something about it? And that was kind of how we got started in getting engaged in politics.
Okay. I actually remember visiting you at Clark, Atlanta.
Yeah.
Back in the day. I came
Good
out there for a
time.
little bit. It was a good time. Yeah, definitely a good time. Now, you're going for supervisor now, and you were a mayor. And the reason I want to do this interview because I help people buy homes in different areas. I also own property. Me and my business partners, we do. So it's always interesting to see how things work from the city level, state level, and beyond. So what is going to be the difference between the supervisor position and the mayor position?
Yeah. And so that's a good question, because a lot of times when people think about government, it's like it's all the same thing, right? Thinking about government, I probably know that there's a president, but everything underneath that, I'm really not understanding how it works. So there's definitely the different levels of government. You think of kind of the national, federal level, think about the state level, then you have even regional bodies and at your local level. And so serving on the Pittsburg City Council, when you think about cities, they really, have oversight over their specific jurisdiction, their city limits. So you think about, everything from, streets, you think about making sure the infrastructure is right, that the sewage and the sewer, clean water coming to homes and the businesses, your public safety components. So most cities run their own police department. But the largest thing really for cities is about land use. And even as you talked about kind of from the development standpoint, so cities get to basically set the policy and the zoning for where development happens within their community. So there's zoning areas for where residential development can occur, where commercial development can occur, where industrial development can occur. And that's really all in the purview of a city council. When you're looking at the county level, it's still a local, but it starts to get more regional, because when you're talking about Contra Costa County, you're talking about all the 19 cities within that county, and really even the unincorporated cities. So you have cities like Pittsburg, Antioch, Brentwood, which are incorporated, and unincorporated are areas that don't have really their own municipality, like your Bay Point, your Crockett's, your Rodeos. And so essentially the county serves as the governing body for those unincorporated areas. But also the county oversees your health services, like your county hospital. It oversees really your justice system. So you're talking about the public defender's office, district attorney, your child services, a lot of the social services that are provided through a lot of the state and federal funding are administered through the county. So your Medi-Cal, you talk about your Cal Fresh in terms of the food assistance, your juvenile probation, all of those are underneath the county's umbrella. So when you think, I guess, the difference between city and county, city is really dealing with your core functions within a city, land use, public safety, infrastructure. Whereas you're looking at the county, it's more of the social services, thinking about the juvenile justice system, the justice system overall. And then also from the unincorporated areas, they serve as the governing body for those areas that don't have a city council and are unincorporated in the county.
Okay, I see. And I don't know if I mentioned, we're both from Pittsburg, California. And I should probably know this, and I hear you mention it often, are policies. I want this interview to be for people like myself who aren't into politics much. Can you explain policies?
Yeah, absolutely. I always, when I have these conversations, whether it's in person or just, sharing at town halls, that policy matters. And thinking about policy from this perspective is that policies are laws, they could be rules, regulations, that folks have to abide by. And policies can incentivize behavior, they can discourage behavior. So you can think about housing policy. Even I talked about a little bit about kind of zoning, right? So zoning laws or policies that dictate where things can be built and how that would work. Other policies you can think about from an economic development standpoint is, whether a jurisdiction wants to provide incentives or not for businesses to come in, the waiving of maybe certain fees or tax deferred payments, things like that. Other policies that you could think about as far as just even with the criminal justice system overall. So when you look at in terms of what people get in terms of the certain prosecution or time that could be served for specific crimes, right? Those are all dictated by policies and laws. And so for me, when I think about it from a local level all the way up to the federal level, local policies and really local politics in general is really where it's at. It's really where the most impact can be made and really where it's felt on everyday basis, right? So when you're in a community, you can think of a policies in terms of fees that are set for how much you pay for your water, how much you pay for your garbage, different policies that we're seeing being enacted now in terms of dealing with how we get rid of waste, right? So a lot of people are probably seeing like their garbage cost is going up and things like that, right? So in California, there are aggressive policies to divert what we put in what are called landfills. So landfills are these, giant plots of land that are pretty much used pretty much over decades to where we dump all of our garbage, right? And then it's buried and covered. But the thing is that there has environmental impacts to when you're just dumping things in landfills. And there's a larger kind of thought and policies being set around how we can reuse and recycle. So with that, it's trying to keep organics, food waste, other things that can cause kind of environmental harm, keeping them out of the landfill. But that also comes with the price tag, right? So when you talk about different behavior with how we get rid of waste, the policies that are enacted, your garbage companies now have to have new infrastructure to divert that waste. Or you have to now learn how to separate it. I don't know if you remember, I don't think growing up, we were worried too much about, the green bin, the black bin, and the blue bin.
No, not at all.
But, kids now are growing up now, and it's like that's being embedded into them because that's the direction that ultimately, especially policies in California, are leading to, is that they want to make sure your organics are in one place, that your solid waste is somewhere else, and your recyclables, because then it really tells us how we can either recycle certain products or be able to reuse certain things. And a lot of that is economics as well, which I won't get too much into the weeds about. But when you're talking about policy, it impacts you on so many levels. So policy can dictate behavior. It can set, fees in terms of the cost that we pay. And all of it really is regulating ultimately, how we live our everyday lives. And so I really like to share with folks, when you think about policies, you're advocating for policies, it's important to understand their impacts, right? And so I know I'm going to get, even as we're talking about this, I love talking about policy, so you probably will have a hard time shutting me up because things will keep going. But I want to talk about at least a specific policy that even we're dealing with in terms of housing right now, right? So policies can be rent control, right? So rent control, rent stabilization, policies that get enacted, right? And so the thing is, you have one issue where you're hearing that, okay, rent is too high or things are uncontrollable and folks are saying that, it's difficult for me to pay my rent. And so they advocate for, hey, we need to put some type of cap on what we can be charged or how much that rent can be increased. But the other side of it is that, okay, you have renters and then you also have property owners and landlords, right? And so that policy is going to impact one way or the other. And so when you're thinking about good policy, it should be in a way that you're trying to address it holistically and not just more of a Band-Aid approach. And so when I say that it's short term, think of rent control. So somebody's living in a unit, all of a sudden you slap rent control, and so their rent can't be increased for a certain percentage over a certain amount of time. That may be good for that individual, but what does that do for the overall market? What does that do for overall production of housing when you're essentially telling landowners, property owners, developers that we're going to cap what you can essentially make or get as a return on your investment? once again, policy either incentivizes or discourages. And so from that standpoint, you look at it, how it's worked over the decades is that we've seen now, we're in California, we're in a housing crisis. So we're saying, we don't have enough housing, we don't have enough housing. Well, look at the policies that have been enacted in California over the past several decades. We have some of the most stringent environmental regulations. So when I say environmental, it's saying basically where housing can be built. So if it has, environmental impacts on transportation, air quality, maybe there's a native species of a plant, or maybe there's an endangered frog that lives in the area. All of these type of things were limiting or causing more of a restriction about where housing could be built. So that's one aspect that almost discouraged housing production. Then you have, we're in California, it's no surprise, we are pretty labor friendly, right? So when you talk about a lot of the project labor agreements that get put in place, that can drive up the cost of the workforce. It drives up the cost ultimately of how the housing gets built. It's another policy impact. And then you think about the fees. So because governments haven't done a good job of infrastructure improvements and building and maintaining roads, they now pass on that fee to developers and say, hey, if you want to develop, you also got to pay these transportation costs. You got to pay these impact fees, which all essentially drive up costs. These are all policy decisions. They drive up costs, but ultimately they have now discouraged mass production of housing because it's become too costly. And so with all of that, I share that policy really has far-reaching impact. And there are definitely short-term policies that try to, address an immediate need. But when you lose sight of long-term impacts, I think you can see some of the results that we're getting now. So that's why policy really matters. And I say that a lot is because a lot of times we're looking at right now, what can we do right now? But policies that get enacted go well beyond the needs of what we're seeing right now. And you can look 10 years down the line and say, hey, did that policy really get the intended outcome that we desired? And you have to reckon with that, and you have to be able to have accountability.
See, very well explained.
Yeah, it's a lot, man.
Very well explained. I've never heard anybody explain it like that. So I really appreciate it. March 5th, that's our date, right?
March 5th is the primary here in, we'll have not only for the County Board of Supervisors, but it's a presidential primary. That's what it's tied to.
Okay.
And so March 5th here in California, we will have our primary, and that will be the vote for county supervisor as well.
Okay, I just want to keep reiterating March 5th for the viewers so that they know when they get that pamphlet in the mail, which should be in February.
Yeah, we're in California, so everybody gets vote by mail ballots.
Okay.
And those will be mailed out on February 5th. So yeah, just in a couple of weeks, those will be going out.
Okay, sounds good. I'm a property owner now, so I didn't look at voting as something I needed to do.
You're thinking about president.
Yeah.
Every 4 years, somebody comes get you excited about president.
Right.
But what happens locally is really where it's at. I mean, you can't.
Right.
I tell people you'll probably never meet the president.
Mm-hmm.
Probably never meet any members in Congress because they're in D.C.
Right.
But your city council member, you can take a ride down to City Hall and look them in the face.
Talk to them.
And what you got to say to them, talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And the decisions that they're making impact you directly.
Right.
So.
Okay, so a lot of people are coming from Alameda County. They're moving their families out to Contra Costa County. The college grad, things we vote on today are going to affect kids 5, 10 years from now. When you think about, I call it the Deep East Bay or Delta, District 5, Pittsburg, Antioch, Martinez, to name a few, what's your vision?
Yeah, definitely. It's exciting thinking about the vision of Contra Costa County, specifically District 5. My vision is that District 5 will become the economic and cultural hub of Contra Costa County. And what I mean by that is that District 5 historically has all the industrial space. So we had all the industry in District 5. So from the west, you're out in Hercules, you have the old powder company that made dynamite and explosives. In Central, where you're looking at Martinez, in that area in Rodeo, you have the oil refineries. And in Pittsburg, you had the steel mill. You had a lot of the old industrial sites as well. And so a lot of them need to be repurposed. A lot of that industry has gone away and have left a lot of blight within those communities. Revitalization efforts to remediate old industrial sites is very costly. So the vision is, how do we bring back those job opportunities, which, when you grew up in Pittsburgh, that's all you would hear about, is that your dad, your grandpa, your uncle, they had jobs at the steel mill, they had jobs at all these spots that enabled them to be able to buy homes in the community, right? And they had these living wage jobs. And when all of that went away, it left a big vacuum and a jobs housing imbalance in our community. So when I think about the vision, right, the vision of Contra Costa County is, historically, it's what's considered a bedroom community. And a bedroom community is essentially that we have everybody living here, but they work outside of the community. So in Pittsburgh and District 5 in Contra Costa County, we have some of the highest commute times even in California, right? So people are spending an hour, hour and a half, up to 2 hours driving to Oakland, to San Francisco, to San Jose to go to work. And so this has created this job housing imbalance. But at that same time, when you look at our position within the Bay Area, we're the housing supply, right? So we're the place that you consider the suburbs, where tract homes are being built, where somebody can go get, a pretty relatively large square foot, in terms of what they want for residential units compared to what they're getting in the general Bay Area. And so with that, it brought a large migration. And we've seen that even growing up. When Deer Valley first got built, we saw kind of this migration starting to happen, where folks were coming from the greater Bay Area and landing in East Contra Costa County. And so with that, that opportunity still exists. In Pittsburgh, we pride ourselves because essentially we think about affordability. We are affordable considered to the Bay Area.
Correct.
Right? So
Absolutely.
with that provides a lot of opportunities for whether it's younger families or folks that their dollars aren't stretching and they can't make it in San Francisco and they're being pushed out. They've been able to call Contra Costa County and District 5 home, where they've been able to put roots, been able to have kind of that stability with housing, and been able to see their families flourish in the community. And so I think that's a trajectory that's going to continue, because we have a lot of land, we have a lot of space available for residential development. And at the same time, trying to find that balance of, okay, how can we improve the quality of life for the folks that are here? So we need jobs here locally. We have the land for it. It just takes revitalization of the industrial sites. But then also it's opportunity now because we're on the waterfront. When you think about communities in Contra Costa County specifically, those that are inland don't have that type of resource or asset. So District 5 has a unique opportunity to capitalize on tourism, arts and recreation, to create those type of districts on the waterfront, to drive people to be able to recreate, to be able to enjoy where they live. They don't have to drive all the way to the city to be able to be on the water, but we just need to bring that development to fruition. And so that's the real vision. And so when I say economic and also cultural anchor or hub for Contra Costa County, it's because District 5 is also one of the most diverse areas in the county. And so when you have that diversity, it also brings a level of culture. We know P-World, we know everything that's happened, even with not only in Pittsburgh, but what's happening in Antioch, and really also across the water, what you're seeing development in Hercules. When you have that type of mix of socioeconomics and you really have that cultural kind of flavor, it brings something that a lot of other communities don't have. And so when we start talking about arts and entertainment and recreation, it just brings more opportunities to highlight what's already happening in the community. So definitely that's the vision, and definitely for folks to be able to share in that, it's really just create more economic opportunity. How do we address that job housing imbalance, and how do we create more recreational entertainment opportunities to drive people into our community and enjoy our waterfront?
I see. You mentioned, I do remember that when we were in high school 20 years ago, there were a lot of people coming from Richmond, Oakland to Deer Valley. I don't know if it's true, but they're reporting a lot of Section 8 from that area. They skipped the 24 corridor. It's kind of skipped Walnut Creek, and a lot of people were in our area, and that was different for us. And it would have been nice to know how that was happening for us to understand, being younger individuals, what was going on. But we are here now, so I appreciate you mentioning that. How do you, with so much going on, how do you plan on prioritizing the needs of different communities within your jurisdiction?
Yeah, great question. So District 5 is expansive, right? So we talk about from downtown Antioch all the way to the city of Hercules, right? So what's happening in Pittsburg and Antioch is totally different from what Martinez needs or wants, or what's happening on the West End with Hercules and Rodeo. So a big part of it, and which is really an awesome part as far as serving as a supervisor, is that you have your own district office staff, right? So you're able to have a staff of maybe 4 or 5 individuals. And the key thing is that you want to establish basically office hours in every area of your district, right? So if I'm living in Pittsburgh, you have the main office. Martinez is the hub of the county seat. And then you also want to have office hours on the West End. Why is that important? Because the thing about local government is people can directly interact with you. So if you're not visible, then you're probably not doing your job as an elected official. So being visible, being able to have conversations directly with residents. So town halls is something I've always wanted to be able to commit myself to, is that in this position, be able to carry out town halls in every area of the district, because you need that feedback loop. You always want to know what's going on the ground. Another area is that if you're a supervisor, that means within my district, I have Antioch, Pittsburg, Martinez, Hercules. So as my staff constantly going to their council meetings, hearing about the issues that are coming up, hearing about what their city is trying to do. So those feedback loops, those communication channels have to remain open. And then also when you're talking about just trying to hear the needs and trying to address different challenges in the community, it's just being responsive, right? As an elected official, you are kind of the public facing entity or individual for a larger organization, right? So if somebody's having an issue, say there's potholes in the street, or there is issues going on with graffiti or homelessness encampments, right? I'm not the person directly going to go out there and do something about it. I'm the one that they're able to voice their concern to and directly go to the appropriate county department and say, hey, this is going on in my district. What are we doing to address the lack of maintenance on the roads? What is the plan that we have to address in terms of what we're seeing going on with homeless encampments that are popping up? So you really are that liaison, right, in between the resident and getting that service provided by the county as an organization. And that's a key aspect of being a representative, right? Is that you're representing the needs of your constituents or the people that voted you in or the community that you have jurisdiction over to the appropriate entity being the county. And that's a big part of it, is responsiveness and meeting those needs that you hear happening in the community.
I think that's big. I think for us, voice being heard, back to hip hop, it was always about hip hop.
Somebody hear me, let me vent this frustration out. And so being able to use that voice and leverage not only my experience, but whatever I have to lend to the conversation is for the betterment of community. And I think when you're thinking about from a perspective of what we're seeing with like La Russells and folks that are using their voice for a larger picture, right? We're at a place now where folks can't even have dialogue or see different perspectives. And it's really one of the reasons, once again, running in it, is that I pride myself on it, man. Like, there's space for partisan politics. I understand it at a national level, and I didn't even share this, like, local level, they're called nonpartisan races for a reason, right? You don't need a party's backing to run for city council, to run for county supervisor. Why? Because that shouldn't be the factor that dictates your decision-making on a party platform when you're really responding to immediate community needs, right? I don't care what party you're a part of when my road ain't fixed. I don't care what party you're a part of when I'm trying to address, right? It's like that stuff is irrelevant. But if that's all you can tout, or that's all you're thinking that you can do is, what does my party think about this matter? You can't even be responsive to your community. So that's a lot of, for me, the passion in running is like, man, we got too many puppets who will just spew the talking points on a specific issue or won't even address certain issues because it doesn't align with their party platform. And it's like, well, then what are you good for as a leader if you can't even have your own mind to think about or even speak truth to what's happening? So voting is really the entry, right? Voting is like the first step. So you vote, you get somebody elected, but now it's your job to hold them accountable. So if they're having city council meetings or school board meetings, go to that meeting. Find out what's on the agenda. Find out how they're voting. Find out how that impacts you, because you'll not only become more informed, but now you know what steps to take. And you have all of this social capital within your community. Right. How does that get used to lift it up?
How do you solve, or how do you prioritize and take care of the unhoused in public safety? Just because I'm not safe, I don't feel safe in Oakland. I do see a big difference from Oakland to Alameda. So please give me your take on the unhoused and public safety.
Policies matter. And saying that is that just starting with like the unhoused and dealing with homelessness. This didn't happen overnight. It's literally decades in the making in terms of what we're seeing with unhoused homelessness population increasing, specifically in California, right? So I'll start with some kind of data, throw out some numbers because I think it's important for people to understand like where we are, what we're doing. So California is like 30%, has 30% of the nation's homeless population, right? You think about that is enormous in terms of when you think about relatively the percentage that we are to the nation. And so I bring that up is because that California has taken some specific positions around addressing homelessness. And so the position that's been touted really over the past 10 years is it's just a housing issue. It's just housing. If we had beds and housing, then it would be solved. And so what we've seen over the past 5 years or so is an enormous, I'm talking billions of dollars spent on buying up hotels and trying to expand beds for folks. And it was almost taboo to say anything about mental health, substance abuse. It was like, how dare you say that homeless people are dealing with these issues? Well, here we are now, and 5, 10 years later, and now the data is coming out, and it's saying that a large percentage, if not 2/3 at least, are dealing with either some type of mental health disorder or dealing with some type of substance use. Is that the only thing that leads to homeless? No, because it's economic as well. If people can't pay their rent or they're being evicted or they have to move out, then that's also an aspect that leads to homelessness. But when we're seeing the chronic homelessness as far as the encampments on the street, folks just kind of out there living in all type of abandoned buildings, things like that, that does something to an individual over time, right? And we're seeing some of the mental health and substance use. So I bring all of that to say is, well, what is the path forward? What is the effective solution? So to look at that, I say, well, what have we been doing, right? So in Contra Costa County, just from 2019 to 2023, how much money do you think was spent on homelessness?
2019.
Just in that 4-year period, how much do you think was spent to address homelessness? When you say multi, what are you saying when you say multi? 5, 10, 15, 20?
I want to say at least it has to be at least 25. I would hope.
Yes.
Right.
So definitely it's at least 25, but it's to the tune of 172 million.
172 million.
Right.
Spent on homelessness.
Spent on homelessness, right?
Okay.
In that same time frame, homelessness increased 4%. Right? So then you ask yourself, okay, what's happening here, right? Is the price tag that we're paying, is it worth the results that we're getting, right? And so I share with you that, the governor kind of had this, project home key, room key. We're going to buy up hotels. We're going to do all of this, right? So county staff has shared in past reports that at least 50% of the people that they approach that are unsheltered refuse the service, right? So now we're dealing with another dynamic. Okay, we're spending a bunch of money, we're creating spaces, and then people have the option of just saying, no, I don't want it. I don't want to abide by your rules. I don't want a curfew. I don't want you telling me I can't do certain things. I can't do certain things on site. So you're just creating, once again, some nuances in how we're addressing it. So the governor is now looking at doing what are called care courts, which are essentially trying to address the mental health and substance use aspect of it. Saying, okay, if we're finding folks out in the streets and we're offering them services and they tell us no, well, can there be some type of referral that will mandate certain treatment for the services that they need? That's one aspect. The other is you're dealing with chronic homelessness, and then you're dealing with more preventative measures that really have more success, where if somebody had just missed a paycheck and, hey, they just need assistance to stay in that home, that is a more likely scenario to be successful than somebody who is already on the streets for 1-2 years, and you're trying to figure out how to not only get them into stable housing, but they have to then find a job or find a way to sustain themselves. So it's a much larger picture. And so I share all of that is that there's no one solution to it, because you're dealing with so much nuance of not only getting people into a bed or a shelter, but how do you transition them to be self-sufficient and sustainable on their own? And that's a much larger conversation because you can't guarantee those outcomes. So that becomes another conversation. So with the homelessness, I think that we're dealing with substance use, and mental health has to become something that the state takes serious. And two aspects that I'll deal with that drove homelessness is that we used to have a lot of what people would call up in Napa, like your mental institutions, right? And a lot of those got defunded, a couple of decades ago. And so services that were being provided for people for mental health was pretty much taken away. And so that was something that contributed and that we really need to look at in terms of providing those services for folks that need it. So we're seeing a large issue. We're talking about more like schizophrenia and a lot of those other type of disorders, man, where if people are unstable, then they really need the support, assistance, and help. Otherwise, you can see them out on the streets, and that's not only public safety for others, but also to that individual as well. Then you look in 2010, and I'm gonna merge this with our question about public safety as well, because in public safety and here in California, there's a large conversation. The buzzword is criminal justice reform, right? I get cautious when you start to hear buzzwords, right? There's nothing wrong in terms of addressing disparities or if you're seeing issues of unfair punishment, right? That's one conversation. But decriminalization laws have wreaked havoc in California. What is decriminalization law? So 10 years ago, we were sold the public, and the public voted for it, was Prop 47. Prop 47 was a ballot initiative deemed the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Initiative, right? And so this initiative essentially said, for theft, anything under $950, we're not going to classify it as felonies no more. We're going to take it to a misdemeanor. Also, when it comes to what you see happening now with kind of the organized theft and the reselling or the purchasing of stolen items, if it's under $950, it's not a felony, it's a misdemeanor. Also, what it did is it took down in terms of like drug possession and drug use, it took down in terms of those felony charges to misdemeanors. And in that same breath, it took away the discretion from judges when it comes to sentencing for drug charges. It took away their ability to now require them to go to drug and substance abuse rehab, right? So just think about all of that, right? Policy matters. Policy incentivizes or discourages behavior, okay? So you have, from a public safety perspective, you say anything under $950, we're pretty much saying it don't matter no more, right? That's essentially what's happened. Under $950, not only is it not a felony anymore, we're saying it's a misdemeanor, but you add to that district attorneys who are now saying it's not worth our time to prosecute misdemeanors, because we consider those petty crimes and we want to focus our efforts on violent crime. Hearing that in general, you may say, yeah, let's focus on violent crime. Don't worry about petty crime. Well, petty crime unchecked leads to more crime, right? And so this is where, once again, when we're talking about policy, it's like the intention may have been from a good place, but when you think through policy and how it's going to have either intended or unintended consequences, you have to think through it. So public safety, once again, there has to be accountability, right? Public safety is all about the protection of lives, the protection of property from any type of harm or any type of unforeseen circumstances that may happen, right? And so if we take this approach with public safety, that it's more prudent to focus on less punishment than it is for accountability, then as a civil society, we're kind of off balance, right? So public safety, you're seeing in a lot of communities, and you can just look across the Bay Area and kind of tell what position different cities are taking on public safety, right? Because you see in terms of the type of things that become normalized within a community. So open air drug use, or once again, you see retail establishments that are closing in a lot of communities. I mean, in Pittsburg, we just recently lost a Target, right? And so in that, you look at it, well, what's happening? We had been working with Target for maybe 3 years or so, trying to address the amount of retail theft that was happening. And you're talking about organizations that are now looking at $5 million plus of merchandise that is going out their door on an annual basis, right? how does that affect their bottom line, right? And you're trying to provide a service to the community. So public safety, really, once again, there's a lot that happened, obviously, in the wake of what happened nationally with George Floyd back in 2020 that brought a lot of really scrutiny. And scrutiny is not necessarily a bad thing because you need accountability. And I think that it's not a either or type thing, right? Like either we support the police or, it's all about defund the police. It's like, that's not what the conversation should be, is what does public safety really mean to a community, right? If I'm in danger, I want to be able to call 911 or pick up the phone and know that somebody's going to come in a reasonable time to be able to protect me or to provide the help that I need, right? But you can see even now we're having a problem now because of some of the scrutiny that we're seeing with law enforcement in the profession, that it's hard to even keep folks in positions where you're seeing folks retire. You're seeing a lack of an interest for folks that either want to go to the academy or that want to work for communities in the law enforcement profession. And as a society, that's not a good thing, right? Because, if there's no accountability, then it opens up the doors for folks to have kind of really lawlessness. So public safety is a big thing for me because we've gotten to this place where we've taken some approaches that have really hurt us in the long run. I want to share just one more, and it deals with human trafficking. So here in California, once again, we have a lot of buzzwords and a lot of terms, so I shared about kind of just the decriminalization movement. So we're decriminalization, magic mushrooms and decriminalization. And it's like, come on, y'all, what does that really lead to when you decriminalize these things? You're encouraging now people to use it. But with human trafficking, we've seen in 2022, there was a Senate bill that was signed by the governor that essentially now doesn't allow police to stop or look into or arrest someone that is out there essentially loitering for prostitution, right? So you think about that. It's like, okay, if someone is out there literally loitering and selling their body, we know there's a whole movement to legalize sex work. That is a movement, but let's just talk about the dangers of it. That's really where my focus is with public safety. Because I work with an organization called Love Never Fails that advocates for those that were sex trafficked, that were victimized. And when you think of how they're trying to phrase sex work, they're trying to make it seem like it's voluntary, right? Like, oh, it's sex work. Sex work, prostitution is not voluntary. Somebody was coerced, and a lot of times these women are being abused into that position. But when you have state legislators and policies that are being enacted that are saying, you know what, this realm is okay, right? I don't know if anybody has seen the number that we're seeing with increases of missing girls, right? Where all of a sudden you look on Facebook and it's like, man, a girl's missing or a girl has ran away. The reality is a lot of the time these girls are being trafficked. They're being taken away. And we know that this is a big thing, and especially here in California, the Bay Area as well, where girls are being taken, they're taken out of state, they're taken somewhere and put out to be sold. And with the boom of how we're seeing with internet and we're seeing things come online, this is a real public safety issue. I'm really concerned. We're talking about women and girls at this point that are being abducted, that are being sold and trafficked. And we're having policies that are being put in place that are now providing a shield for essentially the ones that are putting them into prostitution, right? So if a girl cannot be pulled over or an officer can't arrest her for loitering out there for prostitution, well, obviously, if I'm putting them out there, there's no fear now. There's no fear. You have now encouraged more of this type of behavior. So I share all of that is that for me personally, from a county board of supervisors position, we can hold the DA accountable. That is really the large issue. The DA is an elected position, but the budget for the district attorney's office is set by the county board of supervisors. And there has to become a better collaboration when we're talking about public safety, right? So if police officers are making arrests in the community, they take them and process and they're going to the detention facility. And the very next day that individual is back in the community, that can be demoralizing for the person that's trying to enforce the law, right? I just wasted my time doing all the paperwork, doing whatever I had to do to get them off the streets. And the very next day, they're right back there doing the same thing. I know many have seen in the news where it's like, hey, this person was arrested And it was like they had been arrested 7 times before in the
Right.
same year
Yeah.
for petty theft and for this. And it's like, dang, they got arrested that many times. And why weren't they in jail? Right. Because they're not being prosecuted. It's like, oh, it's a misdemeanor. It's not worth it. And so we're seeing a lot now as a result of these public safety matters, where now state legislators and really even local community members are saying, hey, enough is enough. Like, we need to correct these laws. We need to do something to address public safety. And for me, that's a big part of the platform, as well as that as a county supervisor, once again, you're an advocate, right? There's a platform that you're given to be able to not only communicate with state legislators, but with your community to say, this is what's going on. This is why it's happening. And I'm advocating that we can get some change, man, because it's having too much of a devastating impact on our community, man. When we talk about poverty, when we talk about crime, when we talk about a lot of these things, I really want to tie it all together, because it's like, well, what is the solution? A lot of it simply comes down to education and economic opportunity. Like, if I had to boil it down as far as where our efforts should be focused on, it's education and economic opportunity. There are so many, there's a Brookings Institute study that shows about, basically these measures that will alleviate pretty much poverty in an individual's life. We can look at even in communities where a lot of the disparities are happening. You can look at census data, and the data will tell you if you have higher educational attainment, it typically leads to higher median incomes. It'll lead to all these different things within a community. And you start to look, you can literally go take a look at snapshots. And I did it in terms of looking at poverty, and then look at the number of folks that, in terms of educational attainment and median income. And there's like direct correlations. And it's like, so how do we address this? Education is key. That's why I love what you do, man, because really it's about, when we talk about understanding in terms of finances, right? Understanding in terms of opportunities to get involved with real estate, to start businesses. Financial literacy is something that I don't remember being taught when we were coming up in high school. We know a lot of the wood shop and things that we even, I think, had and was being phased out in our time, where kids don't have those anymore. And they're not learning these basic life skills, because we're talking about workforce development, right? We're talking about not just the education, but we're talking about the future workforce. And if education is failing, if we're not producing, the next generation of a workforce that has the skill sets that are necessary for the jobs that are available, we're perpetuating poverty, right? We're perpetuating this mindset that, hey, I have to wait for the government to do something in order for me to be in a better position. And the government should not have that type of role in individual lives. And I'm in a minority. I know, being in California, kind of having that view. But the reality is, if we focus more on education, economic opportunity, employability, then we'll see a lot more in terms of success with addressing some of the issues that we're seeing. But yeah, it's a lot, man. We need change, not only here locally, but statewide, man. And it's the reason I'm putting my foot forward, man. We got to do something. I'm here to help address and improve the quality of life. And when I look at the real change makers, man, I'm serious, and I say this sincerely, Jerry, like, it's folks like you, right? That's the proud part of being able to say someone that grew up in the community is doing well for themselves. And they're able now to come back and pass knowledge that some folks in the community that may not have, they didn't learn. That's how you lift up a community.
We appreciate it. And I appreciate you being candid, and I can understand what you're saying. I know a lot of us, our age group, we really don't understand politics. We don't understand politicians when they talk. And I'll say that's the biggest difference. I think all the viewers, if you don't know now why you should vote for Jelani March 5th, Supervisor, District 5. Jelani, can you just tell us one more time why are we voting for Jelani Killings?
Yeah, it's important that we have independent and trustworthy leadership. And so as we've been talking about politics, we've been talking about local government, we need leaders that we can trust. We need leaders that can actually think through and actually communicate with those that they're representing. And so for myself, I'm putting my foot forward for county supervisor because I believe we need leadership that will act independently from all of the special interests, all of the partisan politics, but that is solution oriented. And that's really what it's about. I think here in California, we can all see the cost of living is skyrocketing and we're having to pay a lot more, but we're getting a lot less. Every time we look up, we're being asked for a new tax. We're being asked to support a new initiative. We're saying that something is going to be addressed if we just vote yes. And all of a sudden we look up 5 years later and things have gotten worse. And so the reality is, who do we hold accountable? And so for me, I'm all about accountability and transparency. We need to be able to have really audits and performance measurements for all of these programs and services that we're putting taxpayer dollars toward so that you all can see, is it working? Why are we spending so much money in an area, but yet the results aren't manifesting? And so for me, it's all about transparency, being open, being held accountable, and then also being able to get things done. You know, we've been talking for over a decade now about the same problems that are happening in our community, and those who are benefited from it and those who are in power, they're really not inclined to do something different because they've been able to have success and keep their positions of power or be able to keep their contracts in place by keeping things status quo. But we need leaders that will be able to not only speak truth to power, but will be held accountable, be transparent, and really deliver for the people that elected and put them in office. So with that, I hope that you would support this campaign and know that you should vote Jelani Killings for County Supervisor, District 5.
Jelani Killings, County Supervisor, District 5. Thanks for having me, brother.
Appreciate the time.
Appreciate it.